Saying to the people, we're Hamish Yidden, Nishkan Lubavitch, Hamish Yidden who join. Today, people are less afraid of Lubavitch than they used to be. He says to me, you have no idea what kind of interest there is in Lubavitch in the world. Those walls are down. So I spoke to everybody at one point. So, after I finished talking, one of the younger light, the people came over to me and he told me a maaseh about a Litvish Rosh Yeshiva who went over to one of his Talmidim in Philadelphia. He told me a name, and he went over to this boy and he says to him, do you learn Tanya? He says, no, I don't learn Tanya. So he takes out an old copy of Tanya, says, this is my copy, you can have it for a week, but after a week, I want you to get yourself your own copy, I want you to learn Tanya. This was what he told me. So we had a shtickle conversation, but the bottom line was, he asked me, because I talked about tshuva. He says, how do I do tshuva? So we have to learn a bit of Tanya. Tanya is magic. Tanya works. Reb Zusha Hanepala gesagt auf in Sefer Tanya Kadisha. Reb Zusha Hanepala, who gave a haskam on the Sefer Tanya, said that the Sefer Tanya is the samei marpe for alle magefes von ikvus the Mashiach. It's the remedy, it's the medical, it's the spiritual refuah healing for all the diseases, all the sicknesses of ikvus the Mashiach, of the heal of Mashiach. Tanya works. So we have the good fortune to learn Tanya every Sunday, Mitzvah Hashem. Yeah, except when we don't. We do, except when we don't. Now, last week, we had what I thought was a half-decent class, Nitzlecht. The teuchen of the class was about his bonenus. It was long, and I thought it was good. But the whole idea of his bonenus. And what I explained last week is how a lot of things, yeah? But one of the things I explained last week is how his bonenus is different than meditation. I believe, and I don't know, but I believe. And who's asking me? I can say what I want over here, but wer fragt bei mir? I believe that in Breslau there's an avodah which is called his boidedus. It's big, it's very big. Rab Nachman was very stark at even his boidedus. Breslau do his boidedus. They go away by themselves. You know we have his boidedus in Chumash by Bilam. And I'm not saying this is the grace. Vayelech Shefi, when he wanted to become a Novi, is a young alone. I think personally, and again, this is just me, that the Bresla Avodah of his boidedus is a lot closer to meditation. There's a very big difference between his boidedus and his boidedus. There's a very big difference. And the difference is that in one case you're using your mind, and in the other case you're clearing your mind. The difference between using your mind and clearing your mind is as follows. When you're using your mind, you're being proactive, you're doing something on purpose, and you're dealing with your consciousness, with what you know about yourself. When you clear your mind and you let what's inside come out, you're starting to get in the realms of the subconscious. And if in your particular sewer is nitrein, what comes out is toxic. It's toxic. You know, they do trawling. I don't know if you know what this is called. Trawling is a fishing technique. And I teach you everything over here, except Chassidus, yeah? Trawling is a fishing technique. What's trawling? They take these huge nets and they literally scrape the bottom of the bed of an ocean or of a river, and whatever is above it gets taken in. So people complain about trawling for many, many reasons. And one of the complaints they have against trawling is at the bottom of the ocean, there's all kinds of garbage. Garbage kipshute. Plastics which don't decompose, and toxins of all different types, mercury and what do they call it? Antibiotics, which are not good for people. When they sink to the bottom of the ocean, they sit in the sediment, they don't bother anybody. And when they trawl, they bring it all up. The ganze schmutz. And the best solution is leave it. It's a very serious. In other words, it increases pollution. The lake is polluted, but it sets to the bottom. Let it sit. As long as it sits there, the lake doesn't bother nobody. And in the human psyche, it's the same thing. Yeah, we have enough problems with the schmutz about ourselves that we know. We don't need to find out about the schmutz which is buried. And that's why his bonus is very different than meditation. And people who, I've discussed this many times in the past. I had a woman who came to this class says, I know 3 different people personally, or I knew 3 different people who were involved in the Rebbe's initiative for Jewish meditation. The Rebbe spoke about Yubis Tammuz, 1979, Tavshan Lamites. It was a reaction to what then was called TM, Transcendental Meditation, which was Mamish Avodah Zarah. And the Rebbe made a huge effort to create Jewish meditation. Behind the scenes, the Rebbe was working on Jewish meditation, I think 2 years before he spoke about it publicly. The Rebbe asked a psychiatrist named Landis, Yehuda Landis, Olav Shalom, to head up a committee that would create Jewish meditation. And they collected many professionals, frum professionals, that were involved in the field of psychotherapy and social work to create Jewish meditation. Because the Rebbe held that meditation is a mix of good and bad. And if you're going to say it's all bad, what you're going to do is that you're going to force the people who are going to do it anyway to be involved in meditation, which is Rachmana litzlan Avodah Zarah mamish. So the Rebbe said you have to Fernande Kleiben. This was the Rebbe's approach at that time, and the Rebbe had a whole committee of people who did. But the Rebbe gave rules. A guy told me that he left this organization doing Jewish meditation. These were his words exactly. They weren't listening to the Rebbe. They listened to the Rebbe, so I left. How were they not listening to the Rebbe? The Rebbe wanted people to use meditation only for the refuah, for healing, psychological illnesses and things of this sort. But he didn't want it to be a way of life. He made it very clear that meditation is not a way of life. In the secular world, meditation for many people is a way of life. That's what they do for relaxation and so on and so forth. The Rebbe opposed that. And what happened to Jewish meditation was that it started going in very spiritual directions. In other words, it was the Rebbe's initiative. The Rebbe started it, but the Rebbe was not in control of it because it was not run entirely or even predominantly by Lubavitcher professionals. It was run by Fruma Yidden, a lot of people, and people started to use meditation as a derech and avodas Hashem. Spiritualists, spiritual people, and the Rebbe was not happy about it. That's as much as I'm going to say on this subject, but I really believe that his boidedus is closer to that, because I think that his boidedus is an avodah for tzaddikim. It's not an avodah for regular people. But that's just the way I understand it. His bonenus with 2 nuns is the proactive use of the mind. You're not getting into the subconscious at all. You're using your mayach to be shaltal alev. You're learning about alakus. You are meditating. I use the word meditation, but the correct translation of his bonenus is contemplation. Ibitzetracht, or the durchzetracht, to think over, to think through. In Yonim and in Chassidus about Achdas Hashem, and about the Eibishter's involvement in the world, in Ashgacha Pratis, and so on and so forth, to create a greater sense of the reality of the Eibishter, to make the Eibishter realer to you, and of course, ultimately, the end of his bonus is supposed to be Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem, to love the Eibishter for the Eibishter. But this is a very difficult madrege. Chassidim am getracht Chassidus. Didn't thought Chassidus great, Chassidim thought Chassidus a lot. But there's a clear line between the Chassidim who thought Chassidus and the Chassidim who thought Chassidus so much that they actually developed Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. Ketzad Yaveh, this is the Rambam, Hayedua. La'avasei, li'yirasei, l'chashay yizboinen. The Rambam says it 3 times. 3 different times. The Rambam writes in Yad HaChazaka that if you want to have love and fear of the Eibishter, you have to learn about the Eibishter and you have to understand the Eibishter. Because what you don't know, you can't think about. What you don't think about, you're not going to feel. You have to use your mind to arouse your heart. But not everybody who did Avodas HaMoyach reached Lev. In fact, the Ava Vayira was a very high madrege. I would say that by the Alter Rebbe, Ava Vayira was standard. The Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe got Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. By the Tzemach Tzedek, the Größe Chassidim got Avas Hashem, yet the great Chassidim Hashem. By the Rebbe Rashab, I told the Greinem, the Rebbe Nishpaseiden, in a Fabrengen, mir seinen schon gewohnt, aber wir haben nicht kein Ava Vayira. We're already accustomed to the fact that we don't have Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. But in Lubavitch, I mentioned to you, I'm repeating last week's class. Reb David Aradoker hat einmal gesagt, Amol folgt sich a Kitzelton. A Kitzelton. Who is a Kitzel? A tickle. Von Ava Vayira. You're talking about big Chassidim whose whole life was Vekas Nalakus. It's not a joke. It's Nishka Galechte. There was nothing in their life except getting closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Asamas the Musa in Sof Baruch Hu. And such people, maybe at a kitzel getan ave vayide. It's not a poshte zach. Reb Chaikel Khan and Olav Shalom, Ayer Tate. It's like the Tzeilin, I thought in a sefer that the Rabbi the Masmid used to verbringen. The Rabbi the Masmid was a Yida Tzaddik. He was such a big chassid, the Tomim. And the Rabbi the Masmid used to verbringen. And when he verbringt, hat gesagt, L'chaim. Rabbi Fuchs hat mir gesagt, vertrinken Maschke wie a fish. But he didn't eat anything. He was so frum. If you drink and you don't eat, that's a special, that's only for Yechidei Gula. So when he would get shikir, So at the end of the verbringen, he had to walk him home. So Reb Chaikel Khan is Russia yet. Reb Chaikel Khan is walking home with Rabbi the Masmid. Rabbi the Masmid is in his own world. I don't know what he verbringed about. I don't know the context. In other words, I don't know what the verbringen discussion was. But as they're walking in the street, each of the Masmid is saying loud. It's a Russian night. And he's saying loud as they're walking, leave. I love him. Again and again, I love him. So Reb Chaikel was a younger man at the time. Says to the Rabbi the Masmid, who do you love? The Meibish. That's what he said. I love God. Loving God is a very special thing. I'm not saying having a relationship with the Eibishter is a very normal thing. It's a very natural thing. Loving the Eibishter, Liebhab in the Eibishter, Avas Hashem, and Yiras Hashem, that's a very big madrig. So we talked at length last week about the idea of his bonanus, where a person thinks about a lakus, contemplates a lakus, in a way that creates Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. So I want to continue that conversation. I want to talk a little bit more about that conversation. Okay, and I suppose the Rebbe that represents this process more than any other is the Mittler Rebbe. The Mittler Rebbe wrote the Kuntasai Spilos. You read the first few prokim of the Sefer Shara Yichot from the Mittler Rebbe. It's all about his bonanus and Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. And basically, what I want to say is the following thing. The way the nefesh is designed, the way the nefesh, with the neshama is set up, is that every level is the opposite of the level before and the opposite of the level after. The way the neshama goes, it's not smooth sailing, it's very bumpy. Because the first madrega in the neshama, which we're going to call chokhmah, goes in one direction. The second madrega in the neshama, which is bina, goes in a different direction. And then the third madrega of the neshama is the regesh, the emotions, goes again in a different direction. And then doing Maisa Bepeil in the Levushim and Machshava Divra Maisa is again a different direction. So a person is like bobbing, it's like being on a roller coaster. And Chassidus discusses this difficulty, this struggle, if you will, this idea that the neshama goes in one direction and then you have to stop it in a different direction and then back in the first direction, back and forth, each step contradicts the other. Chassidus said there's something called Pnimiyas HaMoyach V'Halev, a deeper level of Moyach V'Halev, which is sometimes called Moychen de Gadlus. Pnimiyas HaMoyach V'Halev, or Moychen de Gadlus, is somebody who figures out that it's not bumpy, that it can go smooth without bouncing back and forth. It's a very deep madrege. It's discussed in Chassidus. All of these ideas are discussed in Chassidus. It's called Mechen de Gadlos. The Rebbe Rashab gesagt in Lubavitch, given atomic. Was I know is gewesen Chaim Yede Lutzki. His mashpia was Abshal David Zislin. Sholber, he was here at Temchapim in Tzedirin in Rusland, and the Rebbe used to send him bachrim. And one of the bachrim the Rebbe sent him was this guy. He's Chaim Yed. So the Rebbe said to Reb Sholber, "Ich bekomme Briefen von deinen Talmidim und sie schreiben, als sie Chassidim von alten Rebbe." You imagine? The Rebbe Rashab said it to Reb Sholber. He later lived in Tel Aviv, and Magahat said derech eretz. And you hear Tmimim were very straight people. They were not into phony covet. But for Shalber, that even the biggest Tmimim, I mean, the Bianca Landau, the Chaim Kesselman, the Sheil Brook, one of them said by his Levaya, that such derech eretz, he lived later in Eretz Yisrael. But the Rebbe Rashab said to Shalbet, I'm getting letters from your Talmidim, and they're writing in the Madrega of Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe. Now you don't understand what that means. I don't understand what that means. At least we understand. The Sazak, Grace Zach. So the Rebbe Rayat, the Rebbe Rashab said about this particular Talmud, Chaim Yeit is holding by Pnimis Amech Valev. Pnimis Amech Valev means that it goes from the brain to the heart without stopping and starting. The way the neshama works is on the lower level of the neshama. You stop and start. You stop and start. Chochma stop, then is bina because they contradict each other. Bina stop, and then is midas because they contradict each other. Midas stop, and then is machshava dibur u'maisa because they contradict each other. So you're stopping and starting, and stopping and starting, and stopping and starting. On the pnimizdika level, you transcend that obstacle, and it goes smooth. It's a very deep level. It's a very, very deep level. A very, very deep level. The Rebbe Rashab hat ihm gesagt, soll sich behalten. The Rebbe Rashab told him that he should become a tzanua. So he used to come around with theater tickets. And he say he's going with his wife to the theater. Everybody knew it was a big joke. If I liegen ganz strong in bed, trachten chassidus. He would lay in bed a whole day, clearly he's sleeping, and thinking chassidus. And when he would get out of bed, the pillow was soaked with tears. Durgenet. He was a God, push like a hoiben erit. I told him from Lubavitch, who like the Rebbe Rashab said, turn back the clock. Anyway, so I'm just mentioning this particular chassid because he was holding by what's called the chassidus pnimius hamoich. Pnimius, the inner mind and the heart, is something called moich the gadlus hamoich. Pnimius hamoich v'alev is that you go from one level in the neshama without any. It's streamlined. It's pnimiistic, yeah. But for the ordinary person, the way the design of the neshama, the nefesh is, that a quest towards spirituality is full of bumps. Like, what do they call it? Those bumps in the road that slow you down. Speed bumps, yeah. Because what's chokhmah? What's chokhmah? Chokhmah is the intuitive mind. Chokhmah is the mind of chiddush, intuition, creativity, enlightenment. So chokhmah is, we talked about this at length, yeah? Chokhmah is very rich. And when chokhmah gives you an enlightenment, that enlightenment is very rich, but it's very fleeting. You have no control over it. Bina is like is a technician. Bina is not a creative. Bina is an analytical process where you take the creativity of Chokhmah, and forgive me for putting it in these words, it's very boring. Bina is testing something to see if it's emes. And you study it and you analyze it. The richness, the enlightenment from Chokhmah gets lost in Bina completely because Bina has to take it apart. Bina has to say, your neshama gave you a head and enlightenment. And you don't know if it's true or false. So now you have to analyze it. You have to study it to see if it has any emes. So that's the Bina process. And Bina is the place of his bonus. Contemplation of Chassidus Chabad is a Bina. Because when you think Chassidus, you can't just think of flash. Because if you think of flash, it's easy come, easy go. You have to think the whole process. And the process of thinking an idea so that it comes to you needs to be detailed. The Rebbe always repeated this. This is one of those thoughts that the Rebbe's like gekocht in them. There are ideas that there's no doubt that the Rebbe said more than other things. And one of the things the Rebbe he probably said it hundreds of times, is that the middle of the Rebbe writes that his bonus has to be bepratius. And this statement that the middle of the Rebbe writes that his bonus has to be bepratius, the Rebbe says he uses it in so many different contexts. He uses it for many different types of things. Bepratius means you want to think Chassidus. And you want to think Chassidus in a way that the Chassidus, in other words, you're thinking about the Eibishter, Hashem. But you're not thinking about the Eibishter in free fall, whatever you think about the Eibishter. You're thinking about the Eibishter the way Teda Chassidus, Teda and Chassidus explain to you what the Eibishter is. But you're thinking about the Eibishter not to understand the Eibishter. You're thinking about the Eibishter that Vashevei Salavavecha. That the Eibishter should mean something to you personally. That doesn't happen by just thinking for a second. Just visualizing an image and enlightenment. You have to go down into the nitty-gritty and think over the idea as an intellectual concept. This is not a spiritual exercise. This is an intellectual exercise. It's a seichel exercise where you use your mind to think through an idea, and the point of thinking through this idea is that there should be a certain geschmack, a certain oir, a certain ava, a certain passion for the Eibishter as a consequence. So when a person thinks Chassidus, it's a very intellectual exercise. Yeah, if you've ever watched people think Chassidus, in Chaparayim, because soon you're not going to see such people. I hate to tell you, but Yidden who think Chassidus. I remember as a bocher in yeshiva, I went especially to watch Rabbi Reichik daven. But Reichik was I probably mentioned this before. I went special to watch him daven. What did I see? In one room gesessen a Tisch von Anash und Verbracht. And it was freilich by the Fabrengen. With L'chaim, they insulted each other, whatever it was. It was a Fabrengen. So you went a Tisch on a bank, yeah? And in the other room, the shul is dark. Rabbi Reichik was standing behind the bimah. There was a little bit of a stage with the Sefer Torah, with the bimah sakriya. And behind the bimah, there were the poles on the edges of the bimah. There was a pole, he was seated on the top. And he stood still. Didn't move. He didn't see me. His eyes were closed. When you watched the man. His goof was okay. But you watch his facial expressions said war. He was fighting with himself. I don't know what was going on in his head, but it was a milchama. And I remember I stood there and I watched him. I felt terrible because he was not so healthy up on him. He had to constantly take off his talis and aroiskin. And then he came back in, he put his towels back on it, wind up again. And then half an hour, his davening kept getting interrupted. But I watched him daven, trachten chassidus, thinking. And like I said, there's different levels of chassidim. Thinking chassidus is a technique, and it's a chush. In other words, there's a technical side of it, and then there is a skill and a feel for it. But it's avodas hamayach. You're using your mind to think an inyan chassidus. That's what you're doing. You're using your mind to think an inyan chassidus. So here's the interesting part. And this is really what I wanted to share today. When you're using your mind to think of my chassidus, yeah, what's the whole point? What's the whole point of thinking chassidus? The whole point of thinking chassidus is to feel. Now, feeling is a complicated word. It's a dynamic word. It's a very complex idea, yeah? But that's the point. You're thinking chassidus. The reason you're thinking chassidus is because you want to develop a certain feeling in your heart. That's how it works. You want to develop certain feelings in your heart for the neighbor. Or to say it in Zeir Anpin. I mean, we're not very big chassidim. We're very small chassidim. That there should be a certain a reichkeit, a richness, or at least a feeling of ufgehobenkeit. In other words, when you daven, you're not davening to fight the war with the Yetzer Hara. That you do a whole day. You're davening to raise yourself above the fight with the Yetzer Hara. To put yourself into a place which is called in the world of Chassidus, Lichtigkeit, Reichkeit. That's what Chabad Chassidus is. It's very rich. It raises you up. The avodas hatfila, when a chassid davens and he thinks Chassidus, the purpose of thinking Chassidus is for a little while. I don't want to use the word holy because that's exaggerated. He should be holy. He should be in a space of where the Eibishter is Gishmak, where Hashem and avodas Hashem is rich and beautiful, as opposed to a war with the Yetzer Hara, which is so incessant that never finishes. So you daven, and after davening, you fight with the Yetzer Hara. But b'shas davening, you want to raise yourself. But you watch the person davening, and you see that the davening itself is such a milchama. Shas, it says in Zayah, Shas Leisa, Shas Krava, the time of prayer or the time of war. As they state in Zayah, it's brought to Chassidus at 100 places. So there's a void of Yigiyas HaMoyach. So here's the anomaly. Here you are, or whoever it is, Moshe Shloime Ben Chaim. There was a woman, yeah, whose name was, I'm not going to have her name either. Mrs. Kasman, you can help me with this. Leise Karasik Srebitzen. Leike. The Rebbe called her Leike. She knew Chassidus like big mashpiyah, not like a psar shtickle. She had a gewaltige yedeh in Chassidus. The Frierdiker Rebbe has letters to her explaining on Yoni Chassidus. She used to go into the Rabbeim Yechidus to speak in Yoni Avodah. She was a Goheben, she was a Gerari. She was a Gerari. Her father's name was Nosn. And the Geraris were very rich. Very, 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 very rich. And when they made Shidduchim, the Shidduchim were not only made on the basis of Chassidus. The Shidduchim were made also on the basis of it should be Pasik. So most of their children married either Rebbe Kinder, the Moshe, they had a son Hirschel Gerari who married the Radziner. He was an Edom by the Radziner Rebbe. The Zalman Gerari was an Edom by the Kapishnitzer Rebbe. They took those kinds of mishpachas, or Yidden who were very, very elech, who were also very, very rich. They didn't take for their kids They were Lubavitcher Chassidim, but you know what I'm saying? They were, after all, on the Tefach Echad. So she grew up in this home. And they married them all very young, the girls, 17, 18, very young. When it came time to her shidduch, so her father found for her the Azel, so the Rebbe'she Kinder, the Gvidische Kinder. He's talking all very frum people. Very frum like we don't see frum. Really frum. But rich and balabatesh and shein and thus. And she wasn't interested. She says, I'm living in a house where all I hear about every day and night, is Temchet Mimim, but I can't marry a Tomim because he's got torn shoes. I don't know what this whole thing is a game. If it's real, I want to marry a Tomim. If it's not real, what do you give me a cup with this Temchet Mimim? And she stood her ground with her father, and her father went into the Rebbe Rashab and says, my daughter refuses to get married. So the Rebbe Rashab called her, Leike. And she says, well, what do you mean? And the Rebbe Rashab said, she's right. So she married Lezer Karazik, and later one of her brothers would say they lost every penny they had. Stalin took away all the money. So the daughters who married rich, from the Geld Gun, aber Lezer Lumdis is geblieben. Lezer was a Tamcham, was a Goan in Nigle. He says he didn't lose his Teda, you understand? Leike is geblieben. With her, not and she stayed. Her husband was a Chassidische Yid and a big Landman, a big Asken, and so on and so forth. So she was a Geheib in the Fru. She broke her leg. She broke her hip. It was in 1951. She was here for a chasana. And she came by. So the Rebbe came out of his office and went to the car and handed her a maimah that had just come out. So she should have what to read in the hospital. I'm just giving you an idea. This was a woman. A Geheib in the Fru. The Bochum once knocked on the door of her home. And she opened the door and she said, what are you looking for your husband? What are you, my husband? Yes, He says, if it was Eter, I could forget you myself. When she passed away, the Rebbe printed the Eter in her schus. I don't know if you know this, that the Likutei Torah was printed in 1965, Tafshin Chafei. And it was printed here and printed in Eretz Yisrael. And each printing, the Rebbe asked 10 Chassidim to sponsor the cost. A tenth of the cost of printing the Likutei Torah. And each one of the 10 who sponsored the cost of the Likutei Torah, the Rebbe signed, he endorsed in the back of the Likutei Torah, he wrote his name. He gave them a copy of the Likutei Torah that he himself signed. This was a sign of appreciation. She was one of the 10, Leike, who paid for the Likutei Torah itself. This is the kind of person she was. Anyway, my point is, how many women did you have like this? But she was Gora Gaibin. She was not a simple lady. Okay. So a person who thinks, not everybody thinks Chassidus, yeah? The person, the point of the whole process is a little lichtig, you daven, you spend the whole Shabbos and you daven, you pace the room. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It seems like such a waste of time. The Misnagid calls it Bittul Torah, you understand? You know why it calls it Bittul Torah? Because you don't see anything. What are you running around? What are you rubbing your head? What are you nervous? It's a process. I talked about this at length last week. Asura Mikan, you have to go away from where you are. And only when you go away from it can begin a person has a life, yeah? A life, you have to make a living, you have to support a family, you're involved in Sakedesh, you're a shliach, whatever, you're busy with stuff. And then you have to go away from all of that and connect yourself to Atzma Ein Sof. It's a very big, it's a serious endeavor. It's beautiful to watch, but it's not fun to do. In other words, it's a mochobah. That's why it's not so popular. It's nit gring, davening. But the hasbonenus, the use of the mind, has its own struggles. In other words, as you journey towards a space of a little bit of pnimius oyer, peace, a connection to the Eibush, there's a huge mulchama to get from here to there. But anyway, so here's the interesting thing. I've been beating around the bush. The greatest contradiction to the exercise of his bonenus is to get excited. The whole point of the hisbonenus is to get excited. And the greatest contradiction to the hisbonenus is excitement. You see how contradictory this is? Here you are, you're using your mind to arouse your heart, yeah? But you can arouse your heart in 30 seconds. If you arouse your heart in 30 seconds, you have gunisht, a feig. There's no depth. Why is no depth? Because you haven't immersed yourself in a lakus on your moyach. So there's a built-in irony, there's a built-in contradiction in the exercise, in the process, in the endeavor. Mitzad echad, you are using your mind, and the whole point of using your mind is to arouse your heart. And Mitzad Hashem, you not allow yourself to get excited. So when are you going to get excited? Tomorrow, when you're finished. The goal has to happen. And you, as a meditator, as a contemplator, are pushing it off and pushing it off, because the deeper you engage with your moyach, the more emes there's going to be in the regesh halev which follows. Now, I want to make this clear. I'm talking about regular people. Someone who's in the madrege of pnimius hamoyach v'halev, there's no contradiction. The brain and the heart, on that level, the brain and the heart work at the same time, which of course is very difficult to appreciate in terms of the human psyche, what a person is. But for the ordinary person who's holding in a regular madrege, the use of the mind is supposed to arouse your heart, and the heart is a contradiction to the use of the mind. So this is what goes on in the world of Isbonanus. You think an inyan. And the purpose is to be raised up. But you're not thinking about being raised up. You're thinking about thinking an inyan. And faket, if the kitzel comes, if the Yisraelus comes too soon, it doesn't have any depth. You postpone it, and you postpone it, and you postpone it, so that the when the heart is aroused, it should be deeper. It should be have made a greater depth, greater integrity. So you learn in Chassidus, fancy language, fancy words. In Chassidus you learn that there's a word called bechein. 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 Uvechein, you have in the Shana davening. Uvechein, Yishtav, Kadesh, das weiter, yeah? Bechein, Kadesh, Bechein, Bechein, Pachtach, yeah, Uvechein. Bechein. I recently saw a story about Bechein, and I can't remember the story. I just remember the punchline. Somebody asked the Rebbe about a project that he was involved with. And he wasn't sure if it was appropriate or was inappropriate, if it was kosher or wasn't kosher. I'm sorry, I don't remember what the project does. My brain is full. No place for no information. And he asked the Rebbe, at a very busy time, like Kesha Baruch or something, that he's involved in this project, and he wants to know if it's a good project, it's a bad project, because it was the kind of things that he was not sure if it was Kedusha or not Kedusha. So the Rebbe said loud, so he could hear over the dim of the crowd, one word, Bechein. And he understood that the Rebbe was saying that if this process brings a good end, it's a good thing. If it doesn't bring a good end, it's not a good thing. Let me mean the word Bechein. Bechein means the Titzah, the bottom line, the end of the story. Yeah, the Hisbonenus and Chassidus, the contemplating of Chassidus, is involved. They call it long, short for a reason, because it's long. Like I said to you before, that the Middle Rebbe said, and the Rebbe used to repeat this hundreds of times. It's one of those quotes in the Middle Rebbe, the Rebbe Yechaz, that Nochanan. We constantly say this word, that the Middle Rebbe said that his bonus has to be beprotius. If you think about the Eibishter in a way that's going to change your relationship with the Eibishter, it has to be elongated. It can't be just a thought. You have to think through intellectually the whole process. You have to give your brain enough time to immerse itself into the idea deeply enough that you're there. And then when you're there, when you go away from there, you can have something meaningful. So the way Chassidus explains it is like I described to you before, yeah? You have to stop and start, stop and start, stop and start. Chokhmah is very rich. And you stop Chokhmah, and Bina. Bina is very technical, very involved. And Bina is the place of his bonus. Then the Bina stops. And only when the Bina stops can you have Avas Hashem feelings in the heart. Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. Or even a Reichkeit in the Moyach. What's the bridge between the brain and the heart? If you're thinking an idea of Chassidus, you're thinking an idea of Chassidus in an involved way. And the whole point of thinking is that you should feel. But the thinking and the feeling contradict each other. So you don't let yourself feel, yeah? So what's the bridge of Bechein? And when you finish the whole thought process, you're left with an akudah, with a point. You can't just think the point. You have to go through the whole process. And when you finish the whole process, to come out with a point. That point is what triggers the heart. That's how it's described in the Mari Chassidus. In other words, the heart is not excited by a 15-minute speech. The heart falls asleep. The heart has ADD, you understand? You get him or you don't get him. The heart has to be affected with a fist, a force, a power. But that power is in a kudim. The intellectual contemplation is very nuanced. It's very subtle. It's very complex. It's very involved. It's the opposite of a point. But when you finish the whole Hisbonenus, there's a point that remains, and that point triggers the feelings in the heart. And many a chassid were stuck there. They were stuck. In other words, you would think, see this, You would come away with a nekuda. This nekuda to you was an uplifting. The point when you thought about the Eibishter, and you finished thinking about the Eibishter, and you came away with a point, that point was already for you a richness, an enlightenment on a certain level. And again, remember, understand what I'm trying to communicate, that the purpose of davening, which is a mulchama, but the point of davening, barichis, a Chabad davening, was to raise yourself up and bring yourself to a place where for a few minutes you have peace with the Eibishter. In other words, the Eibishter and you are in the same world. It's a world. It's not a world of war. It's not a world of Yetzer Hara. It's a world of upliftedness. You can't stay there because you got a job and you have a family, other responsibilities. But for the period of time that you daven, you go away from where you normally are, and you bring yourself into a new space. And then there's this upliftedness, this bechen. So the interesting thing about this bonus is that it's hard work. It's very, very hard work. It's not for the faint of mind. The faint of heart, I don't know, but it's not for the faint of mind. The Rebbe Rashak Magzog der Shalom, it's taken out from the Hashmatas. The Shus Tedav Taka Nitvarstein. He was talking about Chassidus Chabad. And he said, Chassidus Chabad is not for everybody. It's not. Why? You have to have a good mind. Now, a good heart is much deeper than a good mind. Chassidus Chabad you can learn if the mind works, the cup out of it. And if the cup out of it, the brain doesn't work, you can be a chassid, you can be a Lubavitcher. Chabad, it's a different story. Chabad is something which is very deep, very special, yeah? But even a person that's holding by Chabad, it's possible that in the brain he goes through the whole process. When it comes to the Hashivei Sadach, he's not in a position to experience a lakus in his heart. But there's no doubt when a Yid stands and davens all day long, he walks away in a rich place, in a place of light, in a place of peace. Yeah? And then he makes kiddush, and eats a piece of gefilte fish, and that's the end of the ganze daven. Okay, you're supposed to react, you're not reacting, so okay, but that's the Meise, yeah? Nach dem Davening, the chief rabbi, the former chief rabbi of England, Sachs, said in an interview, he says, I met Jews who used to daven all day long, and after davening, they were different than before davening. He saw Rabbi Tzien Shem Tov, he saw Rabbi Mendel, Futefas, he was in London in the 60s, and other tziyurim like that. There was a Yankel Gurkov and a Meir Gurkov. He saw Chassidim who davened, and he saw that after they davened, they were different than before they davened. Bepashtus, and this moved him. You know, unfortunately, it's very hard to find such people today. In those days, there were many such people. Tmimim, Aziz Gelez, and I'm not criticizing us. You know, if the Eibush had any kindness to us, we'll bring him a Mashiach and Kel Bavod and all the kindness. We have kindness to him. I'm a kindness to the Eibush. If I'm kindness is Ich Alein. But anyway, this is the process. You use your mind to arouse your heart, but you're involved in avodas hamayach. You suppress your heart, so the mind should actually reach a level of depth. And Alter Rebbe is describing it in painting pages. Gimel, a few words. Chochmah is a flash. It's a rich, enlightened jolt, which is very uplifting, but very fleeting. It's easy come, easy go. So you go away from Chochmah to Bina, which is not rich. It's a war. It's a war of study, of analysis, of questioning, of doubting until you understand correctly. And then after you understand correctly, you contemplate, you think about what you understood for the purposes of developing feelings in the heart. And then comes Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem, a love for HaKadosh Baruch Hu and a fear of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if you do it right, you're raised up. And like I said, big Chassidim, Pashut experience, Avas Hashem, Yiras Hashem, the Rebbe said, what is Rabbi bringing? It's my money for the Friedrich Rebbe, but I heard from the Rebbe, yeah, that we know the Tayag mitzvahs. Every one of the Tayag mitzvahs has to be Maiseh, an action. Yeah. What is the action of the mitzvah of Yediyas Hashem? When you do the mitzvah of learning about Hashem, and you do the mitzvah of learning about Achdas Hashem, where is, well, you're not doing any action, it's just in the brain. Where is the action in Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem? When a person loves Hashem in his heart, or has an emotional fear of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in his heart, what is the action Shabbat? So the Rebbe said like this, that the way the brain is, I've said this to you a number of times, when the way the brain works, the more you use it, the more matter it develops, the mass of the brain develops. So the Rebbe said it stretches. It stretches. The problem is the brain is inside the skull. And the skull cannot expand. So if the brain stretches, there is no place to go. So it falls in on itself. and you have folds, kmotim, folds. It's folds, creases. They say that Einstein's brain, which we donated to science, Nachman al-Islam, it's sitting in formaldehyde and it belongs in a cave, it's very wrinkled. The more you use your brain, the more an unused brain is very smooth. You understand why? There's nothing going on. It stretches, but there's no place to expand, so it falls in. So the Rebbe says that's the maaseh of thinking about the Eibishter. You physically expand, you stretch the matter of your brain. It stretches. You have more brain mass. That's an action. You're creating new material in the moyach. You cause the brain to stretch through the use of the mind. I got to tell you, that probably doesn't happen if you think about the Eibishter once a week in 15 minutes. I just have a feeling that it's not enough. Yeah, the brain is sufficiently stretched for that. You're talking about serious isbodinus. And the same is true on the left. The Rebbe said the mitzvah, the ma'isa of Ava, the Shabbat Yiras Hashem, is that the pulse increases. The heart rate is raised. So fashtei, what's meant Avas Hashem? You get excited about what? What causes your heart rate to go up? Yeah, the Eibishter, Zicher, or a Frage. Not simple at all. And so again, the Nekuda is, we talked about this last week, and I'm doing a lot of repeating today, and I don't mind. But the process is, you use the mind. And when you're using the mind, you want to suppress the heart, even though the whole point is that it should bring Vashevei Salavach. I know a Yid who told me a very personal thing. That in the Yechidus, this goes back, I don't know, 60 years. But in the Yechidus, he had a Yechidus with the Rebbe. A Pneumistic Yechidus. So he either wrote to the Rebbe or he told the Rebbe that when he thinks Chassidus, there's a lot of arichas. The process of thinking Chassidus, you have to think it through. And thinking it through means fananda breklen. You have to spit it, you have to sit and think and think and think and think. And he says that because of the arichas, because there's so much involvement in the contemplation, nothing happens. What's supposed to happen when you think Chassidus, they're supposed to become uplifted. Uf koheim. To be in a place of oyer. On some degree, there's big chassidim and little chassidim and tiny chassidim and teeny tiny chassidim, but the process of avodas hamoyach is that you should be raised up. I'm calling it a place of peace, because I think that's a very real way to visualize it, to appreciate it. So he told the Rebbe, again, I don't know if it was B'dibur or B'ksav, I don't know if he said it in the Yechidus, he wrote it in the Yechidus, that because of the Arichas Hasbonanus, nothing happens. He can think Chassidus for an hour and he's as cold as he was when he started. And the Rebbe told him, B'zeh halosh, these are the words. Ich weiß nicht, für was es darf azeh sein. Man darf reingehen noch tiefer. Those are the Rebbe's answer to him. I don't understand why it has to be the way you're describing it. You have to go in even deeper. Going even deeper. So I said to this man, what does that mean? And this man said to me, it's 60 years since I heard it, and I'm still figuring it out. It's a yechidus. It's what from the Rebbe. Yeah. He said to the Rebbe that because of the arichas hasbonanus, when he thinks on Inyan Chassidus, he thinks it the way you're supposed to think it. Like the Mittler Rebbe describes, it's a process. It's an intellectual process. But the point of the intellectual process is to come closer to the Eibishter. He does intellect, but he doesn't come closer to the Eibishter. And the Rebbe said to him, I don't understand why that is. Go in deeper. Now what does that mean? Well, go in deeper. I think go in deeper means that get to the point. And after the whole arichas, get to the point. You see, this is what depth is. When you go to a deeper level, it's not a long speech. It's a nekuda. We need a lot of time to connect to the Eibishter because we're so far away from the Eibishter, spiritually speaking, consciously speaking. I don't mean on the level of Amunah. So when a person thinks, they get so caught up in the thinking. But if you get to the point, that the point of the whole thinking is to have a relationship with the Eibishter, then maybe you have a possibility of experiencing it ahead. So I spent 2 Sundays talking about his bonus. What I want to do right now is should reread what we learned 3 Sundays ago, and then we'll call it a class. I'm way past my time. So we're going to should learn over the same words that we learned.
Which page?
It's page 14, Zayin Amid Beis in the Sefer Tanya Kadisha. And we're going to start V'hein heim avaim. I don't have a regular Tanya. V'hein heim avaim. I have one here. I have V'hein heim avaim is 4 lines from the top of page 14. We've read this at least twice, possibly 3 times already. Ve'hein heim, and the enlightenment of Chochmah, and the thoroughness of Bina are a father and a mother, Hamelides, that give birth to Ahavas Havaya, love for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'yirase means an awe for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Pachte means a fear of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, if you use your Chochmah to create a seed of Reichkeit for the Eibishter, and you use your Bina to study it and analyze it and to understand it correctly, and you spend the time doing the meditation, the Hizbodinus. Again, in my head, I see Rabbi Leitchik standing there, with the verknechten Stern. What do you see when a man stands very still? His face is saying, I'm at war. I watched. That's as close to it as I got. Rabbi Leitchik was not a simple pasuk. He was not a simple chassid. Rabbi Leitchik was a geheben erid. He was a shaddad. He was a big chassid. He was a very big chassid. And this is what I saw. I watched him down. I stood for him for a long. I stood for over an hour watching him. I wanted to see how it looks. I wanted to see how it looks. You understand? So this process, Hamelides, gives birth to Avas Hashem, love of God, V'yiras Hashem, an awe for God, Upachti, and fear of God. So I already told you the word Yira and Pachad, both are in Midas HaGvura, but Yira is an awe. Awe means I'm impressed by the Eibishter, but I'm not emotionally afraid of him. Pachad means fear. Now, why would you be afraid of the Eibishter? You know the old story. It's a true story. I know what happened to a father is telling his little girl the story of the Baal Shem Tov. When the Baal Shem Tov was 5, his father passed away. Before his father passed away, his father sat him, called him his bedside. And he said to him in Yiddish, he spoke to him, Yisraelik, sollst nicht mehr haben, bei kein Sach, nur für Nebischten allein. Und sollst lieb haben, jeden Jid mit der ganze Tiefenisch von deiner Schom. The first part of Yisraelik, you should fear nothing except for God. So this little girl looks up at her father innocently and says, Ta, why? Is Hashem scary? A little kid. Is Hashem scary? What a great question. Do not fear anything except for the Eibishter himself. So a girl asks father, why should I be afraid of the Eibishter? Is he scary? He's a boogeyman at Mebaisen? It's a gewaldige story. And of course, fear of HaKadosh Baruch Hu was not fear of reprisal, not fear of being punished. It's fear from the reality of the Eibishter. I live in his world, and it's awesome to live in the space of the Eibishter. And on an emotional level, it's called Pach. And we read on, Ki ha'seichel shebenefesh hamaskeles. The mind, in the intellectual soul. Now, there's a lot of contradictions about this, but classically, and Tanya, by the way, is the exception to this rule, but Maimonides Chassidus, the word haskala means chokhmah. Seichel means intellect. Intellect is chokhmah, being a das. All three. But specifically, seichel means the creative mind, the intuitive mind, the part of the brain that discovers things initially. And after you discover them initially in chokhmah, then you process them, you digest them in bina. When he contemplates and delves deeply, B'gedulas Hashem, in the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How? He fills up the worlds. And he embraces the world. And next to him there is no world. I'm going to read those words again, okay? Now this time it's for points. Pay attention. He fills up the world. He embraces all of the worlds. And kulak make Allah hashiv, and to him the world doesn't exist. I'm going to talk about this next week. Nailed up in the Seder. It awakens, it gives birth to, and it awakens. Midas, emotions. Now the Rebbe changes the order. Now he says, Yira Sarei was b'meichei u'machshavtei. Awe, fear of the awe of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in his mind and in his thought. Leira v'lehis beishesh midulasa yizbarech. To fear and be embarrassed from the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, she'ein lo seiv v'tachas, which is beyond any limit, upachad avaya b'libi, and from the awe he feels in his mind, he develops fear in his heart. And only afterwards, v'shuv, and subsequently, yisai libi ava'azim. After the fear comes love. After you're awed by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and afraid of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you say, why should I? So the Rebbe went to Williamsburg. He said, he met the Satmarov. Someone was singing Shiva for his daughter. Satmarov had one daughter, and she left him no heir. He had no children. Satmar Rebbe. And the Rebbe went to Menachem Ovel. It was a tragic event. And the Satmar Chassidim were overwhelmed by the Rebbe. They were blown away by the Rebbe. Blown away. I heard that label growing up that the Rebbe said to label, if I don't get out of here, the Satmar Rebbe is going to remain without a minion. They were mamish, they were blown away by the Rebbe. So one of the people who met the Rebbe at that point said to the Rebbe, Lubavitcher Rebbe, ich hab mehr als ich werde, Eier Chosid. Folakan has it in his sefer. I'm afraid that I'm becoming your Chosid. It's a figure of speech. Ich hab mehr, not I'm afraid, like as if it's a bad thing. I'm falling. Yeah? So the Rebbe says that Vos after his Talmid Yirek and Talmid Ava. Why do you have to say I'm afraid? Say I love it. Why do it out of fear? Say that I love. But this is the Rebbe for you, right there. There, Shmi. Boom. Yeah. But the teva of a person is, it doesn't tell you Perek Mem Gimel, that normally Yireh is before Ahava. There's sometimes an exceptional rule, like he brings in the Ben Derdaya, that you have Ahava before Yireh. But Beklal, that's the Seder. So this, the way it's written here, makes more sense the way it was written before. Before he says Ahava before Yireh, because in the Mitzvah Sheba Nefesh, Chesed is before Gvura. But practically, the way the heart responds to Hashem, yeah, how would you respond if you would meet a very great human being? I mean, someone that you think is great. I mean, if you met the President of the United States, maybe you'd want to ashpaiton, I don't know. But somebody you considered great. And if you would be a teenager, I would say maybe some kind of a, I don't know what I'm allowed to say, what I'm not allowed to say. People are impressed by people. People got intoxicated, yeah, they become fans. The word fan, for those who don't know, is brief for fanatic. That's what the word means, a fanatic. Yeah, a little kid who's 70 years old meets a baseball player and he salivates. He meets a Chassidish Yid and he says, he smells, yeah? He meets a ball player. He said, why? Because this is what he is, yeah? If you meet somebody that you revered, your first emotion is to feel overwhelmed. Your first emotion is, I can't believe this is happening to me. Only afterwards you get excited. That initial feeling is really it's a feeling of yireh. It's an awe and even a fear. Your heart starts to palpitate. I can't believe this. And then you find out that he's a human being and you can talk to him and he's nice to you and he gives you the time of day. So then you can have ahava. So even though in the Midah Sheba Nefesh, Chesed comes out before Gvura, in the experience of human beings, when it comes to things that are bigger than you, not when it comes to things that are your size or smaller. When it comes to things that are bigger than you first experience the Yireh and the Pachad, and only afterwards can you experience the Av. That's how it comes to the Eibush. It says in Zohar that the Seder of Midas Sheba left towards the Eibush is called Yireh, Ava Yireh. Yireh Tato, Ava Zuta, Ava Rabba, and Yireh Eloh. That's how it works. This is how the Tanya develops it. That the first emotion towards the Eibush is fear. On the lowest level, you're afraid he's going to punish you. On a higher level a bit, you're afraid about your own inadequacy. And the idea that you should love the Eibishter, because the Eibishter loves you in spite of your shortcomings, is already a second madrega. It's a higher madrega. And then you have a love which is based on midas ha'emes. You love the Eibishter because of the emes, not because of how the Eibishter loves you. That's Ava Rabbi. And Yireh Allah, the highest madrega, is also Yireh when you feel like you're standing in His presence, that you go completely quiet, totally silent. So here the Seder makes sense. What Al Rebbe said before is different. But here the Seder is first Yireh, then Ahava, because that's how it happens. The Eibishter is the ultimate superhero. You know, if you're going to be impressed by anybody, it's Atzmas the Muslim Tzav Baruch Hu. The first Regesh is a Regesh of Yireh. I'm overwhelmed. And that's what people felt when they met the Rebbe. The first Regesh was a feeling of fear, of being overwhelmed. And then you felt very loving towards the Rebbe, because the Rebbe was so loving towards you. And then at a certain point in the relationship, you started to realize, I think I love him and he loves me, but I gotta have a little distance. This is Lakus, this is ain't safe. And you develop a sense of emes. Midas emes. And next to emes, nobody dances around and says, yippee, I'm next to the emes. Next to the emes, there's a bittul. That's a higher madrega still. But okay, let's keep going. Okay? Vishuv, and after the fear, Yislav, you become impassioned, engulfed, inflamed. Libe, the heart, but Ava Aza, with a very strong love. Kirish Be'esh, which means fire attached to coal. Fire attached to coal means fire that has heat to substantiate it and to preserve it. V'chashecha, v'chafetza, u'tshuka, v'nefesh ha'keka, with a longing and a desire and a thirst. And a thirsting soul. And of course you have 4 words. You have 4 words because there's 4 worlds. L'gedula Saint Baruch Hu, the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Vehi, and this feeling of love, which comes after the feeling of fear. The initial feeling is awe and fear. And again, not necessarily you're afraid it's going to hit you, but you're afraid from the greatness. Then you're drawn into love. But love has a lot of levels. The lower levels of love, I love because of how this is good for me. And then you graduate to a love which is, I love because this is real, this is emes. It's not about us. So the Rebbe developed it. This is the neshama in English. Kalais means expiring. To go beyond the neshama leaving itself. And he brings 3 psukim. Yeah? Tzama nafshi lelikim and tzama l'cha nafshi. And the way it's explained that these 3 psukim are 3 levels, from lower to highest. Nichsev am kolsa nafshi, the end of that pasuk is l'chatzes Hashem. When you're in the courtyard of the Eibishter, the Rebbe has a mashal, Sof Perek Mem Beis, of Chatzes Hashem. What's the mashal of Chatzes Hashem? You walk into a courtyard and you see Harbe Anoshim Mishtachavim Leish Echad. You see a bunch of people bowing down to one man. You don't know who that man is, and you don't have enough of a chush to appreciate that person. But when you see the Chatzara Melech, that everybody is bowing to the king, you're not impressed by the king. You're impressed by the respect that others have for the king. That's a lower level, yeah. Then it says, your neshama thirsts for lakus, but it's only Shem Elikim. Tzama l'chol nafshi is a higher level, the Shem Havaya, and even higher. It's different levels of Kaleis HaNefesh. And then the Rebbe brings a little Kabbalah, which I know that he knows why he's bringing it, but I don't know why he's bringing it, and I'm not going to explain it. He says about Simonim, he says the thirst is fire in the neshama. And by the way, for the Kabbalists keeping score at home, Chochma is Mayim, and Bina is Eish. Chochma is Mayim, Vekis. Bina is Eish. And in the Midas Shebelev, in general, the Midas are also Eish. And specifically, Ahava is Mayim, and Yira is Eish. It's dynamic, it's complicated, it's involved. It's written in Svarim of Teva. It's also written in Kabbalah. She said the Eish Belev, the element of fire is in the heart. The source of moisture and water is in the mind, and more specifically, in general, mind and heart is water and fire, and specifically, Chochma and Bina, water and fire, and Chassid and Gvura, also water and fire. Chochma is called water. And then the Alter Rebbe finishes, and these words, I'm going to go back to these words, and we're going to spend a lot of time. Pei Gimel, it's going to take a very long time, because the Alter Rebbe doesn't say a lot of things. We're going to have to say all the things the Alter Rebbe doesn't say, which are written in Yeres HaKedesh Tezvav. The Rebbe does not explain Chesed, doesn't explain Gvura, doesn't explain Tiferes. He certainly doesn't explain Netzach, he certainly doesn't explain Hoy, doesn't explain Yossi. He explains only Chabad. This Perek is about the Esek Koyches HaNefesh, all 10 faculties. But in reality, he only explains Chochma Bina Das, and he assimilates into his discussion of Chochma and Bina Ava v'Yireh. The rest of it, the Alter Rebbe leaves for us to figure out. So we're going to have to talk it through. Shara Midas called the remaining Midas is Anfei Yireh v'Ava, the branch of Yireh and Ava. Now, so let me just advertise what's going to happen next week. We think we're moving on. I believe that the Be'ezer Hashem is better. What I want to discuss with you next week is the words Memali Kalalmin and Seviv Kalalmin and Kula Kmei Kalach Shiv. I want to talk about the different types of Hizbana. I gave you 2 classes on Hizbananas. And for better or for worse, we talked about it, yeah? We talked about Hizbananas. So we're going to have a conversation about levels of Hizbananas. It's not information that you're necessarily going to use in your practical life, but it's rich information. It's rich seeders. And to be rich is good. To be rich is good.
Explain again what you meant by fire is intense.
That it has heat. You light a piece of paper, yeah? It's wonderful, yeah? For how long? Huh?
What is the cold?
It holds the heat so that the fire has a lasting effect. And when you're talking about Avodas Hashem, you don't want to get excited for a second and get like appeared. It should be substantive.
Well, it's giving it.
Yeah, it sustains it, it holds it. Okay, we're going to stop for a minute and then we'll do Hayem Yem.